Tonight on Need to Know, to legalize or not to legalize, that is the big question in the Empire State when it comes to recreational marijuana. While the deal was a no-go in the recently passed state budget, proponents say it will happen and we all need to get ready for it. But organizations who oppose the legalization of pot are expected to use the delay to try to prevent the legislation from passing. On this special edition of Need to Know, the WXXI News team examines how cannabis could potentially impact our community, including jobs, healthcare, and the economy. Don't go anywhere. Need to Know starts right now. It was in 2010 when Governor Andrew Cuomo gave a definitive no to the idea of marijuana in New York for medical and recreational purposes. Fast forward 9 years, and we've got medical cannabis established in the state, and recreational use for adults could be legalized by the end of this year. 10 states plus the District of Columbia have already legalized weed. Some political leaders say New York will be next. So how did we get to this point? And why are some in favor of legalization, while others say it's a dangerous move to make? Matt Ryan of New York Now explains.
In the winter of 2017, the governor was asked about his position on the legalization of marijuana.
You've smoked marijuana. You've said that you've done so.
Yes.
Why not recreational marijuana? Lots of New Yorkers smoke marijuana.
Yeah, well, because the flip side argument, as you know, is it's a gateway drug and marijuana leads to other drugs. And there's a lot of proof that that's true.
Fast forward to this year's budget presentation, and Andrew Cuomo changed his mind.
Legalize adult use cannabis.
Let's go back a bit first. The governor commissioned a study last year led by the Department of Health to assess the impact of a marijuana program. It found the positive impacts of a regulated market in the state would outweigh the negative. Cuomo then announced a work group to provide advice on the legislative and regulatory approaches needed to, quote, protect public health, provide consumer protection, ensure public safety, address social justice issues, and capture and invest tax revenue. In his official budget proposal, cannabis would be legal for adults over the age of 21 and generate approximately $300 million in tax revenue. A few weeks later, we got a look at the first press conference in Albany for those on the other side of the issue.
My message is very simple. It's very direct. We took an oath as sheriffs of New York State to keep our communities safe. And by legalizing marijuana, our communities will become less safe. That's a clear, strong message. We know, just by looking at some of the statistics, we know that the biggest one that stands out is that people will die as a result of folks making the destructive decision of using marijuana and then operating a motor vehicle. It's the deputies, the police officers, the men and women of our agencies that are going to be knocking on the door at 3 o'clock in the morning, telling a mom or dad that their child has just died as a result of a motor vehicle accident because someone made the destructive decision to smoke marijuana and then operate a motor vehicle. And to have a clear conscience, I cannot stand quiet and allow this to move forward without doing all we can to stop this proposal to legalize the use of recreational marijuana.
The chief of police for a town on Long Island referred to Cuomo's own words in 2017 in arguing against the legalization.
You said that in 2017 marijuana was a gateway drug. Now it's not here in 2019. Is that a reference to how Governor Cuomo described it in 2017?
Absolutely, yes. Out of his word, out of his mouth directly. And we've had no proof that it is not. We all still know, parents still know, it's a gateway drug. They try cigarettes, marijuana, then they go to the opioids and continue on to harder stuff.
Also coming out strong against is the New York State PTA.
It breaks my heart. Every parent has to worry about this. Every law enforcement official has to worry about this. These are our kids.
If the legal age is 21, why is there this worry about trickle down to teenagers? Well, there's an organization called SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. They distributed these boxes lined with statistics about why legalization would be bad. And inside, candy. Products like these, they say, are specifically marketed to kids, despite the age restriction.
We have Cookie Monster being used as an advertisement just last month for an edible. For a marijuana edible, Cookie Monster being used. Okay, that's not adult use. That is clearly targeted at our youth.
That was Matt Ryan of New York Now. You can catch the public affairs program every Sunday night at 6:30 right here on WXXI TV. Well, advocates for recreational cannabis say it will be a moneymaker for the state and an opportunity to launch new business, small and large. It's estimated that legalizing weed in New York could generate more than $1.7 billion in sales each year. I met two local entrepreneurs of color who see a legal weed industry as not only a chance to make money, but also to educate and destigmatize cannabis. However, they question if the so-called green rush will be equitable and benefit those targeted by the war on drugs.
Just come up, it's apartment 4.
On a Saturday afternoon in Rochester, New York, a quaint fourth-floor apartment converts to a yoga studio.
Hi, baby. How are you?
I'm good.
Partners and yoga instructors, Martisa Williams and Rod Coleman, open their home to a few friends who, on a busy weekend, need a moment to breathe.
If you ever drift away, come back to the sensation of breath.
Yoga is all about very much like a looking inward.
Fold forward over your legs.
The two yogis are making a name for themselves in the Rochester yoga scene.
And the next voice you'll hear is that of my lovely partner, Martisa. And she'll be taking over for this.
Williams recently co-founded the group Books and Yoga to promote a healed self and empowered community. If marijuana legislation is passed in New York, they see an opportunity to launch a business that could take one's yoga practice to a new high.
An hour or an hour and a half after consumption of an edible, we'd be in meditation so that people would start feeling the effects of it during a seating. If cannabis gets legalized, our plan is to start a program called Weed and Yoga, where we would have yoga classes that are infused with cannabis. We would have retreats that are centered around cannabis and yoga.
One of the awesome things about marijuana is it can really bring you in touch with physical and mental. And I think that physical aspect is really awesome, especially when it comes to a practice like yoga. When your physical state becomes so much more sensitive and you're in a posture that is challenging, you can probably more readily realize when to back off or when you can go a little further in that pose.
Find length in the spine rather than a crunching. So
the yogis say they have endless ideas for their business, but admit they're limited by the unknown.
Getting licensing, even if it's just like auxiliary businesses. How is the bill being written now?
While groups like Rock Normal, the local chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Law, serve as a resource for those like Williams and Coleman, there are major questions about regulatory requirements, licenses, and more. And being an entrepreneur of color adds another layer of complexity.
I'm someone that runs a humongous risk, dealing with this in law enforcement.
America's public enemy #1 in the United States is drug abuse.
This war on drugs and the mass incarceration that was attached to it has decimated communities of color across the state.
Majority Leader of the New York State Assembly, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, says legalizing adult use of cannabis must involve investing in disenfranchised communities impacted by the war on drugs. She's also calling for resources to support entrepreneurs eager to launch a legal marijuana business.
I think how the language gets structured so that there will be a certain number of I want to say people of color or minorities or women or however you want to call it, that it reflects people having access to business besides white people.
one of our goals is we want people to start businesses. We want to help them.
Bob Duffy is the president and CEO of the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce. He's also the former lieutenant governor under Andrew Cuomo. He says the chamber can help cannabis entrepreneurs of color navigate the unknown.
I don't think anybody could just start a business in this area. There's certainly going to be some controls put in. What they are, I have no idea at this time. But anticipating what they are, maybe as these discussions are taking place, trying to prepare people. And I'll go so far as to say we will look at even having classes here or groups and events to help people see that path forward.
Exhale, sigh it out.
While the path forward is unclear at the moment, Williams and Kuhlman continue to develop their business ideas, and they want others to do the same.
And people are just coming into our home to have this experience with us. It's really, really important for us to think about what reinvestment looks like. And I think that we could start by empowering Black and brown entrepreneurs to get involved.
We have a tiered package for people to get involved officially.
To get their businesses set up. We know that cannabis is going to be a moneymaker. It needs to be a moneymaker for those that have been disenfranchised by it.
A local group in Rochester is part of a national movement to legalize cannabis throughout the country. Rock Normal is also focused on ensuring that if legalized, New York will develop a socially responsible model to regulate and tax cannabis, a model that supports small businesses, entrepreneurs like Martisa Williams and Rod Coleman, and a model that involves reparations to individuals and communities directly affected by the war on drugs. Joining me to explain how that will happen and where things stand with cannabis legalization is Mary Kruger, Executive Director of Rock Normal. And welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mary, regardless of one's personal opinions on pot, if recreational marijuana is legalized in New York, how can we be so sure that entrepreneurs of color will, in fact, have a seat at the table when it comes to wanting to launch a business?
A lot of it comes down to how the legislation is going to be written and what legislation we're going to pass. So when we look at the legislation that was proposed with the budget, the Cannabis Regulation and Taxation Act, or the CRTA, there was some language in there and some provisions that would have helped people of color, specifically people from low-income communities, get into the industry. But the language and the programs around it weren't strong enough, like we see in the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act.
And that second one is the one that Crystal Peoples-Stokes is got.
The MRTA, which is the bill that we're pushing right now and drafting a new version of. And so when we look at building equity and diversity into this industry, it's not just a matter of priority licensing and giving folks the license into the businesses. It's also about supporting them beyond that. So when we look at this industry, it's really unique because we can't get traditional loans from banks because of the federal illegality of it. So a lot of times people are looking to venture capital to get funded for these businesses. And we know a lot of times folks from these low-income communities that have been targeted in the war on drugs don't have access to that venture capital. So it's important that this legislation includes access to funding and then the support for what it takes to actually run one of these businesses.
So for people who just don't get this, right, and they don't understand why equal access is a concern for aspiring entrepreneurs and business owners of color, how do you explain it to them?
I think we have to look back at what's happened to really understand why it's important that we're building equity and diversity into this industry. So we look at the war on drugs, and it had a very set out purpose, and that was to tear apart communities, mostly communities of people of color, and they wanted to imprison them, and that war was successful. That we look at the rise of the prison population in the United States, and it's directly correlated to the war on drugs. And so when we look at that and we look at the concentration of these arrests, and they're really concentrated into neighborhoods throughout the country, and Rochester's no different, it's important that we aren't just handing over the ownership and the billions of dollars that go along with this industry to the folks that haven't been impacted historically from it. So it's about social consciousness and equity, and realizing that if we put the effort in now, what that could do 10, 20 years from now to these communities that we've been tearing apart, it's really would have a ripple effect out to the rest of everything.
So when Rock Normal, when you meet with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle and you talk to them about this very issue and you're talking to them about what equal access means and what it needs to look like, what type of a response do you get?
It's a positive response for the most part. They get it, and but those are conversations that are happening behind closed doors, you know. So really, the only public support that we've gotten from any local elected officials, like at the state level, is Assemblymember Harry Bronson. He has added himself on as a co-sponsor to the MRTA Crystal Peoples-Stokes bill. But our senators, I mean, in our Joe Robach and Rich Funke, the conversations that we've had with them behind closed doors, they've been pretty supportive of the issue, and they understand the social and the racial justice that goes into it, but they aren't coming out and sponsoring the MRTA in the Senate. So it doesn't really matter if they don't come out and make any action. We do have our Rochester City Council, who's been very supportive of this issue. Councilmember Mitch Gruber has actually been leading this. We were able to work with them to write a letter in support of marijuana justice and legalization. Tried to get it pushed through with the budget, but they still are helping us trying to get it through this session.
There are a number of states that have legalized medical marijuana. Individuals with drug-related convictions, they really are out of luck, and they're not able to open a legal cannabis business. So considering how our drug laws, and you mentioned this, and this was in the story as well, have criminalized Black and brown Americans, how can minority entrepreneurs, whether farmers, whether those who want to open distilleries, with past drug convictions, how are they going to be able to thrive in this marketplace? And is that something that you're working on as well in terms of language?
Definitely. So Drug Policy Alliance, who is an organization that we work really closely with, we're part of the Start Smart Coalition that they lead through New York State, which is organizations and individuals throughout the state who are focused on having justice, equity, and reinvestment be in the forefront of this legislation. And so I bring them up because they just worked on a campaign where showing what this industry could look like if it's exclusionary like that. So if you go to their Instagram or their Facebook, you can see that campaign that they did, and putting things in place like must have a college education or can't have any criminal background. We've seen legislation created like that in other states. So Crystal Peoples-Stokes bill has language that's the exact opposite of that. If you have a prior drug conviction that's not like nonviolence related, then it doesn't prevent you from entry into the industry. So it's really looking at how this legislation and the language within it is written and crafted, and thinking about all of those things. So while it was really disappointing to not have the bill pass through with the budget, we're grateful that we have our allies in the Senate and the Assembly who knew that the language wasn't strong enough in that bill to give us what we really need in terms of the justice and the equity and the reinvestment. So this bill that we're working with now, the MRTA, is a really good starting point, and we're confident that it's only going to get better in the next version that's put out.
And what needs to happen if legalized so that, because I know another concern that we've heard from some entrepreneurs, so that big business is not taking away opportunities from solo entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, small businesses?
Yep. Again, it's coming back to the legislation and how we're putting the licensing in place for that and what structure we're trying to set up. So the MRTA, the bill that we're looking at right now, it's a multi-tier licensing system, and so it's similar to the craft beer industry and how that's set up. And it's the opposite of vertical integration. So vertical integration is when a business holds all of the licenses from seed to sale. So they grow it, produce it, sell it. And that's how our medical marijuana program is set up in New York. And in order to have an industry like that, business owners really need $6+ million to have a chance to start a business. So we need to put a distinct difference between vertically integrated companies versus this multi-tier licensing, where multi-tier licensing is if you want to be a grower, you'd get a cultivation license. If you want to be a distributor, you get a dispensary license. So really having the different tiers of the industry instead of just one business that holds all of it. So the MRTA, again, has language around that.
All right. right, well, we have to close for now, but you can learn more about the work and vision of Rock Normal. You can also attend one of their monthly meetings. Just go to Rock Normal. That's ROCNORML.org. And also be sure to check out the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce Symposium Cannabusiness. You can learn more about some of the business opportunities available in the legal cannabis industry. That's on May 16th from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Hyatt Regency. And you can get your tickets at greaterrochesterchamber.com. If marijuana is legalized, how will it impact local jobs, the workforce, healthcare, and other aspects of daily living? Well, that's what reporters in the WXXI newsroom have been tracking down. Joining me in the studio are my colleagues James Brown and Brett Dahlberg, here to share their findings and some of the challenges they encountered in their research. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So before we get into your individual stories, generally speaking, tell me a little bit about what the process was like for each of you. This is still very much a taboo topic. So when you're trying to get people to talk and open up and be vulnerable and honest, how easy was it? Was it a challenge? Was it easy? James?
It varied a lot. There were some employers who were very, very hesitant to speak to me, especially about the idea of their employees being high on the job. There were a lot of reluctant phone calls. One employer hung up on me as I called, and the other ones, it really took going directly to the executive level in order to get down to someone who would actually speak to us. HR directors in particular were hesitant.
Brett, what about you?
Yeah, so in several of the counties surrounding Monroe, Livingston, Wayne, and Ontario County, there's only one person who's certified to provide medical marijuana, and only one of those three was willing to talk to me, and so that's the one, Janine Quinlan, who ended up in the story. But the others didn't get in touch, and it's still, you know, Janine Quinlan said, it's still, for many people in rural parts of the state, it's not something that people often want to talk about, and it's not something that people are willing to go public about.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, I want to go into each of your stories, and James, I'm going to start with you. You spoke with local businesses trying to really prepare themselves for the potential legalization of pot. So talk about the type of impact that legalization could have on businesses, on employers.
One employer told me that he expects a slew of new firings because he's a zero-tolerance workplace. This was Klein Steel. Mike Young was the president of Klein Steel who I spoke to. And he says that essentially there's an adjustment period that's needed as they figure out testing, as they figure out their tolerance, and whether they would be willing to adjust their, he called it a rigid policy. His words, not mine. And whether they're willing to adjust that really depends on what happens in the first months following legalization.
So did they see any type of, I would have to imagine there's concerns about workers coming impaired. What type of parallel did they draw with you when it comes to alcohol? I mean, I would think the two might have some similarities maybe, or no?
Yeah. In terms of Klein Steel, there was definitely a parallel with alcohol. Any kind of impairment was definitely equal. With the other employer, Optimax, that I spoke to, they sort of drew more of a delicate line, especially with the complication of the marijuana being harder to pick out in terms of testing, because marijuana stays in your system longer than alcohol. So alcohol is a little bit different in that it goes out of your system quickly. So with marijuana, they're really, really looking for more deep, in-depth testing so they can tell when it goes into your system and leaves your system.
Well, Brett, you took an interesting angle with your reporting in that you examined how users and prescribers of medical cannabis, how they could be impacted by the legalization of recreational cannabis, and you focused on rural areas. So tell me about why focusing on rural New York was so important for you.
Sure. So that started when the state keeps a list of who is licensed, who's available to prescribe medical marijuana or recommend medical marijuana, and allows their name to be listed publicly. And there are 26 of those people in Monroe County, and in many of the surrounding counties, there's 0 or 1. And that means that it's difficult for people who are looking for medical marijuana to find somebody who can prescribe it. And so my thought when I started out with the reporting was maybe those people will be, maybe people who are looking for medical marijuana will be excited that they don't have to go to that one person, or that, you know, in the one county where there's nobody, they'll be able to just go to a recreational dispensary and use marijuana as a medication. Then the thought is, well, what happens if we think of that as self-medicating? Is that safe, or is that going to be dangerous? Are there complications that can result? And the place where all of that comes together, right, is in the rural areas surrounding Monroe County, and so that's why I focused there.
Interesting. So tell me a little bit about, in terms of the one person, that one medical marijuana distributor that you were able to connect with, what types of concerns, maybe she doesn't have concerns, in regards to the possible legalization for recreational use?
Sure. So I thought when I started that her concerns would be twofold. One would be that it would cut into her business. She wouldn't have a monopoly on people legitimately being able to get marijuana through her anymore. And the other, I thought, was maybe she would have some health concerns. Now, it turns out both of those she is not super concerned about.
Really?
So she said that in a rural area, her business is not, you know, most of her clientele is not actually people who are coming to her for medical marijuana. She works in other areas also. She works in addiction medicine. She works in counseling. And that means that the people coming to her for medical marijuana are actually a pretty small part of her clientele. And so she's not super worried about losing that part of her business. And then the other part, though, about medical concerns, there is a particular slice of the population that she is concerned about, and those are people who have what doctors call contraindications for using medical marijuana, and that means that there's likely to be some sort of complication or some negative outcome if you use marijuana. And right now, the way it's set up, if they come to her and she says, I'm sorry, I can't recommend this, you've got a cardiovascular condition, or you've got a psychological condition that makes this dangerous, she's not going to recommend it. The danger is if recreational marijuana is legalized, now there's another route for those people to get it.
Wow. All right, lots of unanswered questions, and we will find out hopefully very soon. And we are out of time for now, but a special thank you to my guests, my colleagues in the WXXI Newsroom, reporters Brett Dahlberg and James Brown, for joining me today. And you can check out their reports and others on this topic from the news team, and you can also get your latest updates on recreational marijuana legalization in New York. Just go to WXXInews.org. And that wraps up our special edition of Need to Know. I'm your host, Helene Bianduti-Hofer. Thank you for joining me tonight and throughout the weekend here on WXXI TV. Have a great night, and I will see you next week.